just testing the captions.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Great. Are the interpreters ready? Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's fantastic to have Deaf Stories back again for 2021. I'm so pleased to be back after a few months' break. 2020 last year was extreme. All the events that happened, the world just turned on its head. I hope everyone's managed well and they've been able to get through what a year last year was, and they're all ready for 2021 and what it brings. Tonight, for Deaf Stories, our guest is Liz Reed.
Hi, everyone. You're good?
I'm so pleased you're joining us tonight. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the country and the lands of which we're on. We're both based in Naarm. We work, live, play, and visit on Wurundjeri land. Wurundjeris are the traditional custodians of the land as part of the Kulin Nation. They have generations of knowledge and care and looking after country. I'd like to acknowledge all the elders, past, present, and emerging. Additionally, I would like to acknowledge the deaf pioneers, the deaf leaders that have worked so hard for our community and have provided us with a rich history, culture, and language. Without their hard work, we wouldn't be where we are today and have the access to socialization and everything else that we do have, our work, our health. I would really like to acknowledge the deaf pioneers and those current and emerging. Tonight, for Deaf Stories, Liz and I are going to unpack patriarchy and what that means and what it means for the deaf community. As well, there's a few topics we're going to cover along the way about feminism. You may see some new signs along the way and new concepts, or you may have seen them outside of Deaf Stories. We'll talk about them and how they relate to the deaf community, deaf and hard of hearing people, and also those who are not deaf watching tonight can help see what this looks like and what it means through a deaf lens. I'd like to hand over to Liz now to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Liz. This is my sign name. I grew up in Naarm, here what's also known as Melbourne. I was born deaf. I have a deaf brother as well. And I grew up and I learned signed English and made the transition to Auslan later in life. Auslan is now my first language. I currently work as a school teacher and I work at the Victorian College for the Deaf, VCD. I'm an artist as well. I love art. I love going to see friends. And my name sign, Liz, says everything about me too.
Fantastic. Lovely. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about this topic, which is really quite important to us all. There's been quite a lot of incidents that we've seen, especially over the last 12 months. And I've realised that there's a much needed time for this discussion, especially within the deaf community.
I couldn't agree more.
So I would like to look at what patriarchy means. What's the definition?
Okay. Well, I have a sign for patriarchy. It's like this. And why I constructed that is I visualized who's at the top, okay, and who's below them. Okay, the top set the rules. Say this is what you have to do. This is how you have to be. And I think it's best comparing it to people who can hear and people who can't hear, deaf people. People who can hear, the majority, control us, the minority. Right? So men are simply above women. That's what it comes down to. Simple definition of patriarchy.
Fantastic. Are you able to tell us more about the patriarchy through a deaf lens?
Well, what to say? Patriarchy, okay, is when men make themselves stand out better. They stand up. They make more opportunities for them. They exhibit and project strength, power. People are more willing to listen to them. People listen to them. They have more say. They have more rights. They have more presence compared to women. Women also can, when I say women, they can be but not the same. But men have their own rules. So looking at it through a deaf lens, I'd say the same. It's difficult when I think about it in terms of deaf people and deaf lens.
Yes, I agree. It's definitely something we need to unpack more. So, in relation to the patriarchy, I would like to hear more from you about feminism.
Okay, on the topic of feminism, I am a strong feminist, okay? But feminism has a long history. And it started back when women, okay, wanted the same rights, okay, with regard to property. In the past, men owned women. Women had no say. They could kill, rape, murder a woman, do whatever they wanted with her, beat her, and there was no consequences. There was no charge. Women had no rights. Feminism, okay, basically lobbied over many years, advocated for equal rights. It's very different today. I believe feminism is much broader. I advocate for gender. So that's male, female, trans, and everything else. So it's about self-expression, a person able to be who they are. So I believe in gender equality.
Fantastic. So, you're a strong feminist. Can you tell me the time when you realized that you identified or you became a feminist?
Well, let me think about that. I started to have that realization when I was at university. And why I say that is because before I was at university, I was a real, what people refer to as a tomboy, right?
Yeah, same.
Okay. Girls' things, earrings, frilly dresses, necklaces, jewelry. I don't want anything to do with that, right? What I wanted, I was jealous. I was envious of my brother. My brother received the coolest toys, okay, computer games, toys, and I was just filled with jealousy and envy. What did my parents give me? Pretty dresses and other things, dolls. So what I did is I rebelled against that. Okay, I said, stuff that. I don't want anything to do with hair, hair clips. I wanted short hair. I wanted army fatigues. I wanted the whole kit and caboodle, right? I went to university. I studied arts. I met a wide range of people, diverse people, queer people, people of all different backgrounds, cultures. I listened to people talk. And I also learned about art. And we had so many amazing discussions. It really opened my mind to the world. I thought to myself, why do I have to reject what is on offer for girls? But okay, do you know what? My identity became clearer and stronger. Identified as a woman. I didn't have to follow a particular stereotype, okay? Just to do whatever you wanted to do, and you were a woman. And I'm a feminist, and I believe that I can do whatever I want, not to hurt other people, but I can do whatever I want as a woman, as a feminist.
Yeah, I've had quite a similar experience to you. I grew up as a real tomboy. I just rejected a lot of the girl stuff, dresses, dolls. There were some things I liked. I thought that was great, but I just wanted something cooler. There was
Yeah,
cooler toys, sports stuff, car racing.
yeah,
I remember the first time that I saw a woman be very assertive. It was probably when I was watching a movie when I was about 7 or 8, and the movie's called A League of Their Own,
yeah.
and that movie was brilliant. It was based on a true story, about a group of American women. And it might have been at the time of World War I or II,
Okay.
where all the men had to go overseas to fight in the war, and they had to stop the baseball competition. They were wondering how they could
Right.
save enough money and fundraise through that time. So they decided to set up a women's league.
Uh-huh.
So they established female baseball teams across America. And a lot of the women there really stood up and demanded their rights. They didn't want the men to have the control over anymore. They wanted it to be a female-led competition where they weren't allowing men to make any decisions or oppress them. And watching that movie was quite impressive on me, just to see them standing up for their rights as women. And it had quite an effect. But I would say becoming a feminist didn't happen overnight. It has been a journey.
Right.
Little moments along the way, the more that I've learned about feminism as well, like through university, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Do you know what? For us, it comes down to access, right?
Yes, I completely agree. And when we look at the deaf community, we don't get enough information about feminism in an accessible language. We need to talk about feminism and why it's important for the deaf community.
Okay, I just want to go back to that earlier question about feminism. Okay, they lobbied, okay, to basically protect femininity. Against the sign used for femininity, like femmes. For example, pink things, dresses, things which are traditionally associated with being female, being a woman. And the reason why today it is so important that women are still subjected to men, subjugated often. I'll give you an example. When a child is born, it's now popular, for example, to give Maxine, Frankie, Kale to a name, okay, to a female baby. It's okay to give a male name to a female baby, but if you had a baby boy, parents are loath to give the baby boy a female name, a girl's name. Why is that? Because they're concerned their son will be bullied growing up with a female or girl's name. So the femme, okay, or the feminine still is not equal to the masculine, the male. And we're trying to protect women. Why? Because they may like something like this and think, oh, you're such a girl, if a boy is wearing that, or so your identity is crushed. Okay? It's lost. So feminism has given us the ability to have insight. And if someone wants to dress a particular way, if a boy pinks something which is pink, is that going to hurt anyone? No. If he likes pink, let him wear it. Buy it. Go for it. It's about freedom of expression for me. Really, that's the bottom line. Sharing.
Yeah, and it's quite similar to the deaf experience, deaf identity itself.
Yes, so true. Deaf identity is paramount. When we're encouraging people, okay, people who can hear, who are putting deaf people down, saying, come on, speech, and hearing is the norm. You need to be able to lip read and speak. And people would always say to me, you don't look like a girl, act like a girl, look like a girl. It's the same thing. It's a parallel. Can you see that?
Yes, so that's why it's important for deaf people to understand and acknowledge feminism, because feminism isn't always about women's rights. Feminism
No.
itself is about inclusion for everybody, gender equality,
Yes.
equality for those with disabilities, deaf people, queer people, people of color, for everybody. It's so diverse. And when you're telling me how feminism theory can be applied to deaf people and how they can advocate for their rights the way feminists have.
Okay. So how did feminism come about? It's because of the patriarchy, right? And it goes way back to like so many years. Men have controlled everything. It's been a man's world. How did we have to change the law? Women had to advocate and lobby to get the systemic change in. Feminism later became what we know today, but it still is around today, the patriarchy. And feminists are still there agitating and advocating for that equality. We can learn a lot from feminists in terms of the resources, the people, the strategies, their campaigns. We can learn so much from them, Sherry, to advocate for our deaf community and our equality, our rights in a non-deaf or hearing world. This is a world where people hear. To be deaf is different. We're controlled by people who can hear, similar to how men control women.
Yeah, and that's really made me reflect on the Milan 1880 International Conference for Educators of the Deaf.
Right.
For those who know or don't know, there was a large number of hearing teachers of the deaf there. And they made the decision to ban sign language from deaf education globally. And that started the hearing people having the control over the deaf people. There was so many deaf people at the time that worked as
That's right.
teachers in deaf schools who then lost their jobs. And those pathways for deaf students to grow up and have other work opportunities was limited. It had a huge effect on the education of deaf people, and they became second-class citizens in their own countries. So if we think about feminism theory in relation to the deaf community and to the Milan 1880 conference, there's that.
Sherry, it's happened time and time again. It's a cycle that just never seems to end. Recently I was reading about the 1950s. Okay, there are
Yeah.
two people who could hear. They arrived from England, and they looked around. They saw the deaf schools here in Australia, and one of the people's name was Ewing, and they wrote the Ewing Report. In essence, they said oralism is the best method for children who are deaf. Close all the schools for the deaf. Stop the opportunity for children to learn sign language. Why? Did they ask any people who are deaf before they wrote this report and made that recommendation? After that, in Australia in the 1950s, all the schools for the deaf gradually closed and oralism really became the norm. Sign language was lost.
Wow. So was that for all the deaf schools in Australia that they based their research on?
Not all. The Ewings went to New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, and to Western Australia, as well as Tasmania. And only two areas they did not go to were the Northern Territory and Victoria. And Victoria, at that time, had one of the largest and oldest deaf schools. It was established in the country, and they somehow didn't look at it, didn't visit, pushed it aside.
Wow, that's interesting. So they made the decision to exclude Victoria from their report. And wow, what an impact that's had. Because the nation has really looked at Victoria as a leading educator for the deaf. But wow, just can you imagine if they included Victoria in their report and their research? What could have happened then?
Who knows? Who knows, Sherry?
I guess we could. There's plenty of opportunities. We could imagine what could have happened. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
So what issues do the deaf community have in relation to feminism or the patriarchy? Could you speak to those?
To be honest with you, Sherry, the deaf community has so many issues that we're dealing with. One, okay, deaf people are seen as part of a disability group. Okay? There's domestic violence within the community between spouses, partners. And there's a lot more occurrences of sexual assault, rape, a lot more youth suicide, particularly in the areas of young men. Numbers of young deaf men are increasing with regard to suicide. So these are three key issues that I see within the community. These are recurring issues. And males feature highly in each one of these areas. Yes, there are some women who commit acts of rape and violence and assault, but predominantly men do. And I see that time and time again. I've read the stats, I've had personal experience, and I know deaf young men who've committed suicide. I'm thinking, what the hell? So, Sherry, I've come to that realization that we really need to discuss feminism more in the deaf community.
Yeah, that's right. Because it looks like deaf people are at a higher risk of experiencing abuse and so on. And I know
Sure.
there's a lot of people out there who have been unable to, it's hard to talk about it, and even using the sign for it, there is such a high rate of people who have experienced abuse. And I think a big
Yes.
effect of that is lack of information. People may not know what the appropriate behaviors are in a relationship. Additionally, I know that people in the community who have experienced the abuse have suffered or experienced it from people who can hear, who exert their control over them.
Yes. Simply, the deaf community is at a disadvantage in a world of people that can hear.
Yes.
So, in this hearing speaking world, there is so much information available. It could be passive learning. A person may be driving, listening to the radio. Okay, there could be a talkback show or some type of information about a particular subject, or they overhear people's conversations. It's incidental learning. As deaf people, we don't have that. And what type of resources do we have? Very little. We have access to English resources. If it's captioned, we don't have many Auslan translations. Where do deaf people get their information from in Auslan? Okay. It's like we live in a world with a little trickle of Auslan. So the deaf community, okay, and deaf spaces are a major disadvantage in a non-deaf or hearing speaking world.
Yeah, you're right. So talking about that, what what can we learn from this? Actually, hang on. Let me back it up a little bit. What has happened? We're well aware of what's happening up in Canberra with the government at the moment,
We sure are.
with the abuse that has happened in Government House.
Yes.
It's really interesting to follow along with that, but in the same token, I'm not surprised. What are your thoughts about that, Liz?
Where to start, Sherry? It makes me angry. I'm upset. I'm disappointed. I am angry. It just shows same old, same old. Has anything really changed? I see that we're taking big steps forward, but at the same time, we're taking steps backwards. One step forward, one step backwards.
Yeah.
It's exasperating. Do you know that topic? Okay, when I talk about like the women's movement and women protesting, I had a conversation with a young deaf woman about a protest. She said to me, "You know, it's unfortunate. Women should learn self-defense to protect themselves." I said, "Okay, hold up a minute here. So we women are responsible to learn self-defense to protect ourselves from men? Really?"
Yeah, I've seen where was it? I think it was some person in the army, some top guy had said, "Oh, women need to take responsibility to protect themselves
Yes.
and they need to wear modest clothing." and make sure they present themselves appropriately to ensure that they get home at the right time.
That's right. Don't walk home alone in the dark, Sherry.
Yes.
Don't walk for a park.
It's like, I can't believe they're saying that. Why aren't they saying anything to the men? They're not being held accountable.
Yeah.
Myself, I'm non-binary,
Right.
but I do present as a woman. And I do have to think about my safety. If I'm walking home at night, I'll need to have my light on my phone. I'll have to make sure I'm very aware of the situation that I'm in. I have to walk in a well-lit street where others could easily see me, and make sure I stick to paths close to busy areas, not any back streets in a quiet area. I'll have my keys in my hand ready to go. Yeah. And then on top of all of that, I'm deaf. It's an additional layer to be considering. And I don't wear my cochlear. I've left it at home, so I can't hear if anyone's coming up behind me or not.
Right.
I often do ask my friends if they leave to make sure they text me when they get home.
Me too.
But it's, again, men aren't being held accountable for their actions and their behaviours.
No, they're not. It's crazy. It's strange. For so many years, I remember even in school, going to self-defense classes, girls had to learn, try hard how to kick in the groin and do that punch as well. So I went to a private girls' school, and I remember later talking to some people at a co-ed school, and some girls were going to self-defense class. And the boys, what were they doing? Playing sport while the girls were learning self-defense.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
what? Hold on a minute here. Why are the girls having to learn self-defense while the boys can just obliviously go on and enjoy their lives as boys and play sport? What's with that?
Wow. Interesting. I too have gone to self-defense class up in school in Queensland, but we had both boys and girls were involved
Okay,
because their aim was that boys can experience violence as well.
true.
Of course, they acknowledge that girls are at a higher chance of experiencing it, but I
Right, but at least,
remember them saying that, and that was in the 90s.
right, at least that's equality, equal treatment.
Yeah, and I've thought about it ever since. We learnt about doing those throat pushes with the palm of your hand and kicking the boys in the testicles, but about that self-defense. They also taught the guys how to defend themselves as well. And theirs was a little bit different. Like the concept was the same, but the techniques were different.
Right. And that's an example there, Sherry, of reactive behavior, right? So teaching you there to defend yourself in that situation, but not teaching or taking a preemptive approach and being proactive. So before you even get to having to learn self-defense, all right, going upstream.
Yes, yeah. And it's almost like the issue of when abuse occurs due to lack of consent.
Right.
Could you talk more about consent?
Okay. On the question of consent, again, this is paramount. So many people, many people still are confused about the concept of consent.
Yes.
There's so much confusion. In simple terms, okay, let's unpack it here. Consent is not just about saying yes. It's much more than saying yes, Kate. It can also mean, for example, your boss approaches you and gives you a shoulder massage. Nice to see you today, Liz. Yeah, thanks very much. Did the boss ask for consent before giving you a shoulder massage? No, but I was too fearful to say, stop, back off. Why? Because of the repercussions. I could be fired.
Yes, the power.
That's right. It's a power imbalance there. And often it's men who are positions of power and the patriarchy. You may not realize it at the time and just think, oh, I'm confident. I can pick up whoever I want here in the workplace. I can get that girl, that woman, but they're not really reflecting upon themselves. Do they ask for consent? Or just help themselves? Often people who are drunk or drug affected, they cannot give informed consent, okay? And they're off their face or stoned.
Yeah, they're not in the right state of mind to give consent,
Right.
whether it's the alcohol or the substances they're on.
I know of some people who said to me, Liz, what about some flirting? Like, how do you know? I said, flirting. Like, do I have to say, is it okay if I ask you if it's okay if I can do this, flirt with you? Like, hold on here. It's much more than that. Where's the communication? It's all about talking and communicating. That's where it starts.
Yeah, I completely agree. Have you seen that really great cartoon from the UK? And they talk about giving someone a cup of tea, and it was a great
Perfect.
example of consent and cup of tea. Everyone who's watching tonight, I'll share a link to this. I think it's a fantastic idea to show consent in another way.
I have seen that. Yeah, and that's a brilliant piece from the UK.
Yeah, and it really drives the message home.
It does.
And like we said before, the deaf community, we don't have enough information about consent, what it means and how it's important in relation to dating and sex, I guess in all parts of life as well, not just those areas.
True.
And also, lack of consent means that the person is getting the power taken away from them.
Yes.
They're unable to stand up for themselves or be heard. And I know that's happened to a lot of deaf people.
That's right. People who are speaking, who can hear and speak. Where's the consent there when it comes to people who cannot?
Oh, I better just quickly check the time. I think we've got 15 minutes until we have a break.
Okay.
So, the deaf community is extremely diverse.
It is indeed.
Could you perhaps talk about intersectionality and what that means?
Sure. So, intersectionality. It's a mouthful, isn't it? This is a sign I use for intersectionality. One view, okay, feminist view, is it's usually white feminism. Traditionally, it has been white women who have advocated, okay, for feminism. And it's damaged some relationships along the way with, for example, women of color, Asian women, queer women, and Asian feminists, queer feminists, women of color feminists. So intersectionality acknowledges, Sherry, that there is diversity, okay? One feminist does not speak for all, cannot speak for all. So I'm a feminist. I speak for myself. I may speak for some deaf feminists, but I certainly don't speak for all. I don't hold myself out to be that. So intersectionality acknowledges diversity and gives everyone an opportunity to have a voice, to have a right to have a voice, and to be included. So my experience as a white woman is very different to the experience of a black woman. And we have to value each individual experience of all feminists, including people who are non-binary, that don't identify as being female or male. It's important to acknowledge those experiences as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's really important to acknowledge all the different experiences. As I said before, the deaf community is so diverse, which means we've got
Yes.
many, many deaf people who have multiple identities. Like myself, I'm deaf, queer, non-binary, person of color, feminist. It's just the diversity is incredible. And, they're all the intersections that I have, which makes me who I am. And I'm sure that would be the same as you, Liz. You'll have multiple identities. And there'd be other deaf people out there as well that have multiple identities and intersections that help create who they are.
Sherry, I love that. I love the fact that the deaf community is so diverse, comes from all these different backgrounds, so many rich stories. I want to just encourage a lot more of those multiple identity, intersectionality stories.
Yeah, and I think that's why I really wanted to have this topic tonight, because it's really important for the deaf community to help them establish or feel comfortable in their identities, to look at themselves with their intersections in mind. Is there something you can speak to specifically about intersections in the deaf community?
Well, that's a difficult question, Sharon. Why I say that is based upon my experience. What I've seen is deaf people, again, this is one perspective, okay, one point of view. But most deaf people are born into families where people are not deaf. They are all hearing. And they see, okay, that there are deaf people communicating in Auslan, and they're attracted to that community, that sense of belonging. And there's a disconnect within their own family, okay, and the transmission of that culture. There's a lack of access in that family. There's a lack of access to developing the family identity. And no one has one identity, okay? People have multiple identities, a plethora of identities. It's the ability to have insight, explore, understand what you like, don't like, what you believe in, to experiment, be curious, and not live in an echo chamber, right? With the same people, surrounded by the same people, same ideas, same thinking, same look. I encourage people to step outside, okay? Tear the walls down and to speak to people who are different to themselves. That's intersectionality.
Yeah, that's well spoken. I was reflecting on what you said before about many deaf people being born to hearing parents who don't understand language and culture, therefore they can't pass it on to their child. And so that's part of their identity that they discover later, much later on in life. And that's the case for so many deaf and hard of hearing people within the community, to have access to Auslan and the deaf culture. And it might not even happen till after high school. And they're sort of stuck between these two worlds, the deaf and the hearing world, and trying to manage the two. It can be a very hard time, and especially for deaf people who did grow up oral, because they're being told that signing isn't good enough. And when they see the signing deaf community, they feel torn, and then they have to reframe their way of thinking. The deaf community is diverse. We have members of the community that join later in life, or people who are hard of hearing that get involved with the deaf community. And it's just really important to make sure that we help support them in their journey in formatting their identity as deaf people. We're really lucky that we've got the access we have now to other people within the deaf community as we grow up, because both of us are from families that can hear, but we had that
Yes,
access growing up, which is quite rare. Most deaf people who are born to families that can hear didn't have that exposure.
true.
And that completely breaks my heart.
It does. And that's why what I want is I want support, I want encouragement. I want to promote the message to the deaf community. I want more conversations, more thinking about intersectionality. How do we do that, Sherry?
It's been interesting to see what's been happening the last couple of weeks with the RIDBC, their name change to Next Sense.
Yeah.
Their new advertising, they've totally excluded Auslan. There's very small commentary about sign language. And I'm seeing that that's happening more and more than before. Just curious to your perspective on that, Liz.
Okay. I'm going to be polite, Sherry. I feel as though this is a cycle. It's happening again and again throughout human history. Oralism is the norm. Okay. This works, everyone. This works. Oralism works if you talk appropriately, if you talk properly. No, oralism does not work for everyone. I'm here to tell you. It comes back to people who can hear, okay, those that are in positions of authority, knowing what's best for people who are deaf.
That is an example of patriarchy within the deaf community.
It
If you
is.
compare oralism to signing deaf, what's wrong with having both languages?
Right.
There needs to be a lot more promotion on the benefits of bilingualism. I know you're a teacher, so I don't want to take up that spot.
I could go on forever and a day, Sherry. I want to focus upon, okay, the subject, which is the patriarchy and through a deaf lens.
Yeah, that's right. So that was a great example of patriarchy within the deaf community. So if we're looking at patriarchy, how can we work together to really unpack that?
We need more conversations in our community. And last year with COVID, it just closed the community down. Like, where did everyone go? Okay, the deaf rally, deaf markets, deaf events. You didn't have the opportunity to socialize and interact. I really missed that in 2020. So we need to have a lot more deaf community events. We need to be talking about new subjects. Do you remember the TED Talks? Okay.
Yeah.
We need more TED Talks in the deaf community.
Auslan X. It was
And
Auslan
that's
X,
it.
wasn't it?
That's right. Auslan X, yes. And unfortunately, so many deaf people are already busy. They have busy lives. They're already overcommitted. And they take on more responsibilities. You know what that's like, Sherry. I'm looking at you. You're one of those people.
Yeah.
I want to express my appreciation to you. I appreciate you for all you do for the deaf community, including myself.
Ah, thanks. Well, I think now's a good time for a break and also give the interpreters a bit of a break and the captioner as well. And Liz and I a moment to rest. We'll pause for the next 15 minutes and we'll come back at 8 o'clock. So, everyone, please feel free to have a toilet stop, get something to eat or drink, and just reflect on some things that have been said tonight. You're welcome to put some questions into the chat on YouTube, and Liz could perhaps answer them directly to the audience on YouTube. And again, so sorry, Facebook isn't cooperating with Zoom tonight. So, yeah, I'm very fortunate that we're able to then stream this through YouTube as a backup. Okay, I'll see you at 8 o'clock. Bye.
Okay. I'll see you then. Bye, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a chance to go to the toilet, get something to eat and drink and have a break. We have had a few questions come through. Liz, did you want to have a look at those and perhaps give them an answer here tonight? We've got one question here from New South Wales asking if there's any examples of patriarchy existing within the deaf community.
That's a good question. It's hard to answer. And why I say that is that most of the people, within the deaf community are people who can hear. So I don't know about men being at the highest rungs in the deaf community, but there are a lot of male leaders in the deaf community. But is the deaf community controlled by men? Do men control women and others? There certainly is a lot of male oppression within the deaf community. I can speak to that. There's lots of that.
What about deaf to deaf?
I'm a woman, and in the deaf community, I have a number of experiences. And there's a long list when it comes to deaf people oppressing other deaf people. They can be little comments, throwaway lines. For example, wanting to, very carefully, make comments or innuendo or persuade or say things to people. Or somebody say, "Look, why don't you shave your legs? Are you a man, Liz?" I'm like, really? Why do you say that? Like, well, be nice if you shave your legs for your boyfriend, Liz. I don't think so. The person who met me likes me whether my legs are hairy or not. Okay. And who are you? Are you wanting to date me? Well, no. Well, then why are you talking about my body? Why pass comment on my body?
Yeah, good point.
And deaf men have often given me advice. Liz, you should do this, do that, do this. Like, really? They're wanting me to fit into their notions, of being a woman rather than respecting me. They have all these assumptions about what a woman is and what a woman is not.
Yeah, I agree. It's important that you do what you want to do, what's best for you, not what everyone else wants.
That's right. And that's what feminism is really all about. Okay, I'll do what I want to do. Thanks very much. I don't care what you've got to say.
Yes, yeah. Now we've thought about patriarchy, and if we want to look at examples within the deaf community, but it's hard to find examples that are related to gender as such. We have spoken, or there's been a lot of discussions around elitism and grassroots deaf people, which is a form of patriarchy within the deaf community that isn't gender based. Are you able to talk more about that?
Okay, I have seen this international sign for elite. This international sign for elite. Have you seen that, Sherry?
Oh, that was on one of those TV shows, Flirt TV, wasn't it?
Yeah, funny that. Okay, so there are little cliques and tribes, within the deaf community. It could be, this particular clique wants to elevate themselves above others. Thinking, oh, okay, acknowledge, it's there. I had a look, see, and I thought to myself, well, a lot of these people have gone to university. They're tertiary educated. They're in really good paying jobs. They're professionals, and they basically think that they're in that position of authority and they can control. And they want to align themselves to people who can hear. And I've read different posts on Instagrams and articles about ableism. Okay, meaning that I'm a person with a disability, but I'm normal. Okay, don't see my disability. Okay, similar here, deaf people passing as hearing people, acting, inverted commas, normal, to be more like a person who's hearing acting. So passing, people see me, I don't have to say very much, I don't have any access, I'm not going to make any fuss, create any drama, I don't need any access as a deaf person, I'm not going to be different, I'm not going to stand out, so I'm going to suppress my deaf identity, my deaf needs, so I can pass as being hearing. And then people say, you're lazy, you're a dull bludger, you're on the DSP. Are those people, okay, the same as others that don't enjoy the same level of access, education opportunity? So these are type of comments, okay, that
Yeah,
it's a form of control.
I completely agree. I think you may have seen that show on Netflix, Deaf You, and it was so interesting, their perspective on deaf elites and how it's so different to an Australian context. There were
Yeah,
people from deaf families who are fluent in ASL, where we don't have that as much here.
yeah. When you look at the US and Australia, different cultures. Australia is much more focused upon the underdog. It's one of those Australian values. Come on, mate, you can do it.
Yes, where they're more focused on educate. We're more focused on education, where they're more focused on family lines. And we know that there's such small numbers of generational deaf families here in Australia in comparison to America. And it's interesting when you look at Gallaudet University, there are a lot of children of deaf families that go there, and then they become Gallaudet legacy students. We don't have that here. The quality of education that deaf people get in Australia, the quality of work, literacy skills as well, all of that is on a completely different level to the US. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, deaf fact: the average deaf person literacy levels when they leave school is at the grade 3, like a 9 or 10-year-olds. This is in the Western world. Okay, I'm talking about the Western world. I can't speak for other, like, non-Western world, for example, parts of Asia. It's something about deaf education, and they've been trying to find, the right approach. But still, deaf children often are exiting secondary school with the literacy of a grade 3, 4 student. So we talk about skills, fluency in Auslan, for example. They may be highly fluent in Auslan, but don't have that similar fluency, competency in English. That will impact their employment opportunities and prospects, particularly for promotions. I look at deaf organisations, and they say they want people who have high literacy, okay, and they're going to be disadvantaging themselves.
Yeah, the barriers are there. It's really interesting. And connected to that, there's a lot of information available to hearing people that isn't available to deaf people. Information is presented in English. We don't have that information available in Auslan.
That's right.
So do you have any thoughts about grassroots deaf people?
Mm. So in terms of when you refer to grassroots, I can't speak about a lot of experience. I can't really talk to that. It's important for the deaf community, yes, what you're talking about.
I think we need to acknowledge that they're part of the deaf community's rich diversity. What I've seen, grassroots deaf people have these rich experiences. It's so profound, and I think we really need to encourage their participation more, share their knowledge and experience with the rest of us.
It comes back to intersectionality, Sherry.
Yes, exactly.
Like I said earlier on, okay, a person can be highly fluent in Auslan, be a brilliant storyteller, but not have equivalent skills in English. And they're treated differently, seen differently. I remember one particular episode, there was one woman who was speaking Spanish. She's a Spanish speaker. She went to the US. She went to the US, and people put her down. They made fun of her. because of her English level ability. They said that she was less than. She didn't have great English. She was a Spanish speaker. She lost it. She went berserk. She said, I'm smarter than all of you in Spanish. Okay, if you say that about me, I'm dumb in English, well, then you're dumb in Spanish. So if you think about it, okay, let's turn the tables. So hearing people are dumb when it comes to Auslan, right? Deaf people who are fluent in Auslan are smart in Auslan.
Yeah, that's a great example.
There's different types of intelligence, different types of knowledge. Let's listen to that.
Yeah, and that's when people have their own preferred language, how they want to express themselves. It doesn't mean that they're unintelligent. They have intelligence, and they're as long as they're given the opportunity to express themselves in their preferred language, then they can show their knowledge. It's really important.
Yeah. Auslan and English are two separate languages, right? We know that.
Yes.
We need to have resources in Auslan. There's a paucity of resources in Auslan.
Yes. Oh, we've just got a fantastic question come in. Here in Australia, the feminist movement, do you think they have an autist attitude towards deaf women?
I've met some feminists here. For example, at the Victorian Women's Trust Institute, near Flinders Street Station. And honestly, there's some tokenism happening there. And I think it comes back to white feminism. They're not acknowledging intersectionality.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a shame. I agree with you there. I have noticed when we look at the intersections of diversity, queer, Indigenous, they're not always as acknowledged and included. Sorry, other groups like queer, Indigenous groups, they'll be more inclusive for deaf people, but I've seen the feminist groups aren't so. And I think it's perhaps we have similar experiences of oppression from the majority culture in comparison to the white women from the white feminist groups.
Yeah.
Was there anything you wanted to add on to that?
Look, sure, I agree. I've gone to different events, different places, queer spaces, Indigenous spaces, people of color communities. Look, for me, my message is acceptance. We need to talk. We need to chat. We need to have communication amongst all different types of people. When I think about the Victorian Women's Trust, they're all able-bodied, hearing, speaking women, predominantly white, and their resources I looked at, they're not accessible to me as a deaf person, as a deaf feminist. Recently, I don't know about now, but when I did some research in the past about identity, I looked at some of their videos. It was not accessible to me. So I read books because that information wasn't accessible to me as a deaf person.
Yeah, it's not easy when the information and the resources that they're making aren't accessible or easy to identify. I've had another one come up about needing more accessible information for the deaf community to access topics like patriarchy, feminism, and so on. What do you think would be the best way to share information about these topics?
Well, again, it's difficult to say because there's no resources ready to go. Okay. There's no resources. We have to start building resources. We need to start
Yeah,
telling stories.
yeah, I agree. Online, there's so many different resources available, but it's hard to know which is good, which is a great one to start from. Is there paid content? Do we have the time? Who's responsible for building and maintaining it? Then we're looking at perhaps translations.
A few years ago, maybe a little more now, I don't know, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I tried to set up a deaf feminist group. Okay. You remember that?
I think that was around the same time I moved to Melbourne.
Right. So I tried to bring people together, okay, create a deaf feminist space. I invited different people to present to us, to share their experience. And unfortunately, I also studied full time while I was working, while I tried to set that up. And I just put that on hold. And it's been on the back burner. I really would like to reestablish that group. But it's just it's happening, so many other things are happening in my life. And I know like book clubs, you could set those up, unpack the topic through discussion, talk about texts.
Yeah, that would be really nice. So since you established that about 7 years ago, well, maybe you've got that 7-year itch. You could bring it back to life again.
Right, the 7-year itch.
Because I'd really like to see something like that going again. But it's not easy for one person to set it up on their own. You really need that teamwork and support.
True.
Just reading back through over what we'd spoken about before, and one thing we hadn't yet raised was about the hashtags. I know you want to talk about them, like hashtag Me Too movement. Can you cover that?
Okay. I think maybe 2 going on 3 years ago.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, it was just it went viral, right? That Me Too movement, hashtag Me Too. And settled in the US, right? In no other place than Hollywood, where an actor, okay, alleged that another actor, okay, abused her. And then other women stood up and said, Me too, me too. They didn't have to name that person. They didn't name themselves. They said, Me too. And that went viral. Right? And there were so many people, so many women who came out. Like that just sent tingles down my spine.
Yeah, me too.
And you know what? I posted something and said, Me too. Because we needed to call it out and acknowledge it. Okay. It's been a taboo, a social taboo. The shame associated with that, the shame that women have carried. It's a part of the patriarchy, and men have won every time when women do that.
Yeah, I agree. I've been following the hashtag Me Too since it began. When I look at my experiences and reflecting on that, there's lots of stories that I'd like to share with this community, because these stories are rarely spoken about openly within the deaf community. Our community is so small and people are hesitant to name abusers. Last year, I decided that I had nothing to lose, and I thought, why not? I'm going to be all right. I've got the community, they're going to look after me and protect me. So I ended up writing my experience of abuse that I'd faced. And wow, to see the community support me in their comments, it was really, really beautiful. But what was interesting out of this experience, you know, speaking of abuse and rape, and a lot of people said, oh, you should report them to the police. And I said, no. Why? Because the judicial system is so unequal, especially when it comes to people with disabilities, especially deaf people trying to navigate the legal system. There's no justice. I feel like I'll be better with community justice. The deaf community can look after me. I was happy to name this person, and that worked for me. But wow, it really did start the discussion, the impact on the deaf community. Some deaf people contacted me privately to tell me their stories of what they went through with the same person. And I guess, yeah, it's another part of how the Me Too movement had an impact on the deaf community. I know most deaf people are scared to share their stories, and I understand that. I don't blame them at all.
Yeah, Sherry, in some ways, not wanting to share those stories is another example of the patriarchy exerting influence.
Yes.
People just keeping their mouth shut. They don't want to name people. They don't want to cause any trouble. And the men who have abused these people, okay, they're in strong positions. They should not show emotion, okay? And then the men will say, the women are all about drama. They're making this up. They have no sense, or they're all emotion.
Yeah, it's not easy. What I hope to see more people sharing their stories, being able to get support from the community and to talk about it. And then perhaps we can then become a healthier community.
Sure, one thing I want to add here, okay, we need to call out things, okay? And there are some people who turn that around and say, if you call it out, okay, they put you down. Okay, we need to start calling things out, okay, in terms of feminism. Feminism has a call, okay? There's a call in. So first of all, I want to let you know what you're doing is not acceptable. That is wrong. And then you bring the person closer, have a conversation, unpack things, educate, come to an understanding, an awareness, and you both acknowledge that education is the key.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's really important. Oh, I've seen another question come through. I've seen comments from men out there who are feminists. So what's your perspective on male feminists?
So just repeat that.
Yeah, men who identify as being feminists. What's your view?
Sure. If you want to call yourself a feminist, go ahead. It's up to you.
Yeah.
But what I will say is it doesn't mean that you can speak for women, okay? So yes, you're an ally, okay? So you're standing up in support of women, okay? A diverse range of women, and you should have your say. Identify as a feminist, but don't speak for women.
Yeah, it's the importance of being a good ally, whether that's to women, Aboriginal people, queer, people with disabilities, being an ally and supporting all of them, but also making sure you're reflective of your privilege and to know your place amongst all of this and to be an ally, have some empathy, learn from everyone. It's just so important. We've got about 5 minutes left, which, wow, I can't believe how fast tonight's gone.
True.
Is there any last key take home messages you want to tell the audience? Anything that you really want them to know or to reflect on after tonight?
I want people, one, to know who they are. What is your identity? Be clear about that. We talk about gender. So, for example, pink. Is pink only for girls? Pink originally was a color for boys in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
Boys wore pink. They were given pink. Girls were given blue. But in the 1950s, there was a shift thanks to advertising. Girls are in pink now and boys are in blue. They're colors. Think about toys. You give a girl a doll and you give a robot to a boy. What message are you sending? What are you trying to say? How are you educating children and the community? The next thing I want to share is how to talk to other people and the people that you are surrounded by. Are all those people the same as you, have the same opinions? Or do you surround yourself with a diversity of people and diverse opinions? Or you're living in an echo chamber where it's all homogenous, we all agree. And with was one person that has a bad idea, you're in an echo chamber, everyone else has that same bad idea. So my encouragement, my challenge is A call to action is reach out, listen to different people, to yourself, and listen to their stories and what you can learn.
Fantastic. That's given us a lot of food for thought tonight. And of course, we can continue this conversation online, on the YouTube chat. Once this video has been processed, then I'll upload it onto Facebook so more people can add comments there, tag each other, share the video, because I think this is a really important discussion that it cannot end after tonight. It's going to be something that's ongoing. And yeah, we need to learn more about each other from each other.
Hear, hear.
I think that's it for tonight.
Sherry, thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciated this. I find it's been a wonderful experience. It's been an honor and a privilege.
You're very welcome, Liz. I've learned a lot from you tonight and a few other things that I'll be thinking about tonight as I log off. And it's also helped reconfirm some suspicions that I already had. It is a tricky discussion, I know, especially with your role and my role within the deaf community, that we need to navigate between that. And it's not easy. But I think this discussion has been really valuable.
It has been.
And I can't stress enough how important it is for the wider community, the deaf community, the hard of hearing community, people who may not be fully immersed within the deaf community yet, just for everybody to understand feminism and the patriarchy through a deaf perspective. So, with all of that said, I would like to say a very big thank you, Liz, for your participation tonight. I've really enjoyed our time together.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, Sherry. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to our two interpreters, Paul Houston and Kelly North. You've done an amazing job tonight.
Well done, Paul and Kelly.
And also Bradley Reporting for their amazing captioning service that they've provided tonight as well.
Bravo.
And again, a big thank you to the audience today. Your flexibility to be able to watch tonight on YouTube rather than what I'd used to do. Facebook, what can I say? I could strangle it, but I'll make sure I get onto it and fix it before our next edition of DeafStories. There'll be an announcement in the next week or two, so keep your eyes out for our next edition of DeafStories. Thank you so much for all your support tonight. I hope everyone has a lovely weekend, and I'll see you in no time.
Goodbye. Good night.